Thank you for joining us for the March edition of Coffee with Coker. As always, it's a privilege to have you join us. Immediately following today's presentation, we will have a question and answer period, so please feel free to submit your questions in the area provided in the GoToMeeting dashboard. The participant phone line will be muted for today's presentation, and the materials will be emailed to you shortly after the conclusion of the session. As you exit the webinar, a brief survey will pop up, and we would greatly appreciate your feedback on this presentation, as well as suggestions for future topics. Terry Wilk, Senior Vice President, and Kyle Chang, Senior Manager in Coker Group's Technology Division, will be leading today's presentation. Please join me in welcoming Terry and Kyle.
Thank you, Savannah. I appreciate that very much. Kyle, do you want to say hello as well?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Appreciate everyone joining us for this webinar.
We sure do appreciate that. And we are going to talk about a very, very important topic that there's lots of press on it at this point, called cybercrime and hacking and all of that. But we're just terming it cybercrime today, the new reality. And we have some, what I think is some fresh, hopefully insightful information for you all on what we are seeing in the industry. So let me go ahead and move forward on this here. Before we begin, I want to start off with a story, and you may have heard this story before, so bear with me if you have. But one day, Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson went on a camping trip to get away from the big city and all the stress that they were facing. And after they had a nice big dinner and a bottle of wine, they lay down for the night and went to sleep. And after a while, in the middle of the night sometime, Holmes wakes up, he looks around, and he taps Watson on his arm and says, "Watson, I want you to look up at the sky and tell me what you see." And Watson looks around and he says, "Well, Holmes, I see millions and millions of stars." "And what does that tell you, Watson?" Well, astronomically, it tells me that there are millions of galaxies and potentially billions of planets out there. Astrologically, I observe that Saturn is in Leo. Theologically, I can see that God is all-powerful and that we are small and insignificant. And meteorologically, I suspect that we will have a beautiful day today. What does it tell you, Holmes? Holmes says, "Watson, you idiot, someone has stolen our tent." Now, I would hope that there's a couple of chuckles out there, but I don't hear anything, and it's not unusual when I tell a joke to have silence, so I'm used to that. But at any rate, I wanted to open up the presentation not only with a somewhat humorous story, but more importantly, I think it illustrates a little bit of what our topic is about. In the world of computers and electronics and digitization, we can all get enamored with the technology and what's all going on around us. And like in Holmes and Watson's case, the basic tent was stolen, and Watson didn't even see it. So right under our eyes, right under our noses, if you will, things are happening and can happen to us that are quite serious in nature. So we want to pick up on that theme as we jump into the presentation. This is a slide that just simply begins to introduce all the different things that comprise cybercrime. And hopefully you can see some of the words there: theft and international, domestic, warfare, networks, all kinds of things going on. And as we will see in a few minutes, it is pretty scary of what we're beginning to learn. And like anything like this, especially when it deals with companies' images and perceptions in the marketplace, there's a lot more of this cybercrime going on than we're aware. There's cybercrime right now going on that nobody is aware of, that it hasn't really made it. There's cybercrime that has happened that only those companies know about, but it's not publicized because, again, they're afraid of their images and PR and all that could happen to them. And then, of course, more and more is coming out. And what we're seeing now is more and more in the press about healthcare. Many other industries have faced cybercrime for years and years, and if you've been a student of that at all, to go back and see how the banking industry, financial services, transportation, some of the other industries, they have been hit for years, and it's getting worse and worse. And now the shift is getting to healthcare, because on the in the black market, a healthcare medical record can be worth as much as $50 or more per record, versus a credit card number that might be worth $1 or less. And why is that? Well, in a person's medical record, you have access to their drugs, you have access to other information about their medical care. And one of the things about the drugs, by the way, the e-prescribing that's being pushed so hard, which there's a good benefit to it, but on the other hand, imagine now all of these prescriptions being done electronically and being hacked, and the hackers taking the prescriptions, getting drugs for themselves, or selling it on the open market. And we're seeing some of that happen. There's not a lot of publication on it yet, but those are things that we have to be aware of. Cybercrime, just to go back to the beginning, it's really an intentional attack against some proprietary data assets of an organization. And by its definition, this is unauthorized access, so it is an illegal activity where a computer is used. And literally anybody in the safety, security of their home or wherever they commit these crimes, they can access other people's computers, networks, databases, and really get at the data that they want to get for some type of personal gain, whether it's to use that information personally or, as I mentioned earlier, to sell it and make money that way. It's on the rise, and it really is here to stay. And I guess as I thought about this, you know, if you were going to commit a crime, not that hopefully you aren't, but would you want to walk into a bank and hold it up and then realize all the risks there and what that means, or send out 1,000 or more malware attacks at no cost with essentially no risk? And Kyle will talk more about the technology, but it is really amazing and scary of how these things can happen, again, being so well disguised to us. So today's focus, we want to discuss the serious state of affairs regarding cybercrime in healthcare. We want to give you some sense of the most common forms of cybercrime used by cybercriminals, and present some real-world examples, strategies, and tactics for addressing these types of risks that we all face now, whether you're an individual with your own assets, your bank accounts, your own personal information, and in the case of healthcare, with your medical records as well. So the frightening reality, and I summarized here 4 or 5 organizations that have had cybercrime committed. Target, you may remember that, they stole 40 million credit cards, and Target is still reeling from that situation that has happened. Now, a lot of those credit cards, of course, probably all of them, or most of them, have been canceled and new ones issued. But a community health system, they had a compromise in their patient records of 4.5 million for various reasons, whether it's email, whether it's intentional, unintentional, these things have happened. Fiat Chrysler, here's an interesting one. They recalled 1.4 million vehicles last year because thieves hacked into these cars' computers. And you say, well, golly, what's so bad about that? Well, these computers control brake systems, they control the speed of the car, and they're becoming more sophisticated. So imagine you driving a computer-controlled car and somebody hacks into it and suddenly you're out of control. I mean, that would be really, really bad. Talking about a way to cause some chaos and injury to people. Hospira's Symbic infusion system, FDA warned that hackers could control the device and actually change dosing levels real time. So a patient sitting or laying in their bed or sitting up has this infusion device attached to their arm, and unbeknownst to them, somebody from the internet can get in and change the dosing level and kill the patient, or some adverse reactions. So actually, Hospira took this particular infusion system off the market to address that. And that also brings up a point for those of you that do work in hospitals, that you do want to make sure your infusion equipment and other biomedical type equipment is up to the latest releases of software, and that's a whole discussion and probably webinar in itself, and you'll see more and more in the press on all of that. And finally, and Kyle's going to give us an anatomy on this one here of Hollywood Presbyterian, what happened there with the $17,000 ransomware payment. I'll let Kyle get into the details of that. And as I mentioned, thousands of additional unreported cybercrimes across all industries. And I just did note and put this at the bottom here, New York State is the first state to ban and penalize the use of paper prescriptions, which again goes back to my point earlier about as the federal government and the states are going to push organizations to use e-prescriptions especially, we really need to really know what we're getting into and beef up our security, and there's ways of how we can do that we'll share some ideas. So bottom line, in our hyper-connected, digitized world, really there's nothing that is 100% protected. Everything really is vulnerable that has a computer chip in it. I mean, across the board. The IoT or Internet of Things, as more and more things are becoming automated and tied into the Internet, remote monitoring of patient devices, cars that I've mentioned, refrigerators, other kinds of things. Lots of good in it, but unfortunately with human nature, a lot of people will use this for to do bad things. There's all kinds of what we call front doors, back doors, side doors, hidden doors, trap doors into different systems. And not only is it a challenge to write code to develop a computer system to do something that you want it to do, but now we also have to write code to protect it to do things that it shouldn't do. And I mean, that's been a challenge all along, but especially now because we could really, really hurt ourselves and people. It's not enough anymore to just focus on simply encrypting laptops or changing passwords or establishing different policies like bringing your own device and other password change policies, login policies. But we really need to fight cybercrime. It's got to come front and center in the mindsets of a board and an executive team, in our opinion, because the cybercrime is not just a technical issue. It's a business issue, as we're now seeing with the ransomware, with the threats to patients, not only their information, but also their lives now. I mean, it's really, really getting serious. And one example here, a very recent example, St. Joseph Health System in California in 2012, and you may have heard of this because it is a couple of years old, but it's a very good example. The PHI of nearly 31,000 patients was out on the internet. Included lab results, BMI, body mass index, and other clinical information that was breached. Fortunately, no financial or address information or social security numbers was revealed at that time. However, 3 years later, almost 4 years now, they just finalized a class action lawsuit settlement. All these people whose records were exposed, about 31,000 of them, came together, got some lawyers involved, and now the judgment is that the hospital will pay $7.5 million to be split among the 31,000 affected patients. That's only $242,000 each per patient, but looking at it from the hospital's perspective, that's $7.5 million they didn't plan to spend. Oh, by the way, there's another $7.5 million in attorney fees and costs that they had to pay. And also, by the way, they're going to have to make available $3 million for the plaintiffs of those 31,000, $3 million set aside for if there was any identity theft losses, they can apply for up to the $25,000 max, according to a report, which is the source there in the bottom right is the Orange County Register. So, since this breach about 4 years ago, St. Joseph spent more than $17 million, 7.5, and 3, more than $17 million on upgrading their IT systems, and $4.5 million on credit monitoring for affected patients. So $39 million to date through all of that because of that one particular situation. So then I asked the question again, is this a business or a technology issue? Well, it's really both, but it really is a business issue. It just happens in this case to be affected by the use of technology. And as we'll find out here, a lot of it is more of the people, human behavior use, although there are certainly technology issues as well to be addressed. So the lesson, and I'll turn it over to Kyle here right after this, healthcare organizations must not only provide for the safety and security of their patients, but their patients' information as well. And one of the things we'll talk about at the end for those of you that are wondering, well, how do I introduce this? How do I get this, raise the awareness in my organization? We'll talk more about how to do it. But the fact of realizing it isn't just about patient safety and security while the patient's in your facility, but it's ongoing with their information as well. So Kyle, I will turn it over to you to talk about some cybercrime tactics and other related topics.
Sure. Thanks, Terry. Well, I don't have $39 million sitting around, so we got to look at other ways of prevention. And I think one of the best ways of prevention is really trying to understand some of the tactics and strategies a lot of these hackers use to get in. I mean, that's the point. I mean, that's what they all want to do is just to get in. I mean, they're just a bunch of really cyber stalkers, you know, for a majority of the time, and they kind of poke holes at your weaknesses. I mean, day in and day out, we look at the network devices of our clients on the what we call the edge level. So it's basically from the internet in, and we literally, it doesn't matter if the office is large or small or it's a hospital system. There's thousands and thousands of attempts to try to get into that network every single day. I mean, it's gotten to the point where we more than likely we expect that we are going to have to change our strategies on many different levels. It's not just the technology, as Terry was pointing out. It's not just the technology issue any longer, because you know it's the technology. It's the technology that the hackers use. It's just as advanced as the technology that we purchase from a lot of these companies that sell us the antivirus software, the anti-malware, and the firewalls. So, you know, one of the big tactics here that's been used is called phishing. And phishing, to me nowadays, it's really an umbrella terminology. There are a number of ways of phishing these days. And at first, it was email. That was the most common way. It's still the most sought-after way to gain access. Now, with the way smartphones are set up and the way we can use an email client of any type to be able to send a message directly to someone's cell phone, I mean that's another phishing tactic as well. I see it once in a while off of my own cell phone, and you know I have to look at it, and when I see the text like that and says you've reset your password, you know, on your bank account, click here to confirm, I look at it and I'm blocking out that number. It doesn't look right to me, and if I feel it's not right, it's going to get blocked out. I mean, and the reason I do that is because I live and breathe this type of stuff all day long, and because I do, I have an awareness to myself, my coworkers here, my family members, and we talk about this, you know, day in and day out. With my kids, they're very young. They're 10 years old and under, but they're online, and I have to educate them. Same thing with our clients. We educate our clients because that fourth bullet point right there, social engineering, it's very, very important. If your organization has not gone through a social engineering education or a test, you should definitely look into it because it's worth its weight in gold. And I'll give you a really good example. I was just telling Terry about this about a month ago. I had a client call me, and I'm so glad they called me because we had a type of social engineering, nothing formal, just a number of folks, you know, me kind of giving a presentation, talking about the landscape of cybersecurity, and the employees of the entire company just open forum, asking me questions about it, and I talked a lot about phishing and the multiple ways these hackers phish to try to get access or get information. I had an employee call me. She called me directly and said, she said to me, "Did we get a new IT company?" I said, "No, we did not. You definitely did not get a new IT company. You're still kind of stuck with us." Um, and we talked through it. It turned out that there was an attempt to try to get into her workstation, and the way they did it was they called using a piece of technology, and it knew exactly which number to hit based on just phone numbers being published on their website or what have you, and she just so happened to pick it up, and she said, "You know what, you don't sound right, it's not the right company, I didn't get an email about it, I need to talk to our IT director, which is me." We talked about it, and this is why we go through these types of social engineering talks internally here on my team at Coker and also with my clients these days, because you never know how someone is going to try to get into your network. It could potentially, 9 times out of 10, it's probably going to be completely electronic through email or whatever. But this was the one instance, because we created that awareness, that they understood that maybe this is someone trying to phish using traditional methods. Next slide, please, Terry.
Okay.
Oh, geez, malware. It's all over the news. It's always all over the news, and the reason being is that there have just been a number of organizations. Hollywood Presbyterian recently was hit with a type of malware, and it's an umbrella term for a number of things. But the way the malware gets in is 9 times out of 10 it's probably through email. USB keys are real big. Folks bringing in laptops from their home that have been compromised. I mean, there are just a number of ways of getting in, of getting malware, which have viruses that could affect your organization. And the bad part about malware is there are just other things. The malware it's nothing. It's what it delivers. It's the payload, and the payload is the ransomware. I mean, ransomware is so big. There's a new one today called Crypt, and I think Symantec was working on it. The security division at Intel was working on it. Cisco security arm was working on it. And I've been following this for the last couple of days now. Basically, their report is they can't decrypt it. There was one of the first more popular ones about 2 years ago called CyberLocker, and there were a number of organizations that were able to decrypt the ransomware. And for those that don't know, let me take a step back. The way a lot of these ransomware things work, Hollywood Presbyterian being the one, big example is that the malware figures out how to get into your network. It delivers the ransomware payload, and it encrypts basically any file that it can get their hands on. So all the shared files, all the local files, all the shared files. If you have a map drive that has a shared file that everyone shares, those files get encrypted. And after it's encrypted, a little text file sits there and it wants you to open it. And when you double click on it and you open it, it says that this is what you need to do. This is how you need to pay a ransom. It's kind of like some of those movies that Liam Neeson is in. It's one of those Taken movies. Well, instead of taking a loved one, it's taking all your digital data. So, but this new one called Crypt is a little bit different, and all the major firms at the moment, they cannot decrypt it. The previous ones, this is only within the last few years, and it's just to give you a good example of how advanced these things get. The previous ones, they were able to decrypt it after a couple days or a couple weeks, but this new one, they can't decrypt it, and it's kind of making everyone a little bit edgy these days. There's another ransomware that kind of appeared early March called Cerber, and that was one that can be traced on, and it was definitely from some sort of a development kit. There's a lot of ransomware development kits out there these days, and I don't want to get too much into it because I think I talk a little bit about it later on. But we've got create the awareness. I mean, there are just organizations out there that they've developed a business out of it, and there are some that are nation-state actors who are just they just want to hack in, grab some data, and there are just others that they just want to hack for the sake of hacking. I mean, it's kind of like a challenge, a competition for them. Whoever gets in, I don't know, they get a $25 gift card at Starbucks or something. Who knows? Terry, next slide. You know, our data's like money. I mean, that's just the way it works. I mean, we've got we need to change our behavior. I mean, I've personally, you know, my personal and financial information, for me, it's very, like everyone, it's very important. Very simple things like my banking documents at home. I've got my investment documents at home. I've got my banking statements, things like that. I don't receive any of that on paper any longer. The paper that I have, it's completely shredded, and I actually, on a personal level, I don't have a problem saying this, but I actually paid someone to come and pick up all of my documents and shred it electronically and send me a certificate, just as any organization should, on a more professional level. I mean, there are just too many ways for someone to gather information about me on a personal level that could not only just affect me, it could affect you know, my family, it could affect my wife, my kids, my parents. Doesn't matter. And then something else. I actually have, and I'm not endorsing anyone, but I just want to give an example. I have cybersecurity insurance on a personal level through Travelers Insurance, and they have cybersecurity. I just want it. I mean, it gives me peace of mind that you know, it's that I have a backup in the event that my identity was compromised. As an organization, I think we need to, you know, our company. I mean, our company and our clients, we tell them the same thing. I mean, do whatever you can to make sure you are as secure as possible into protecting not only your organization's personal identity, but also the identity of your patients, their data. And it could be very simple things, just credit card numbers. I mean, you know, we go into a lot of practices, and we still see little credit card slips that are sitting around, being left around, and there are also other things that you can use to protect yourself. Give you a good example. If you ever go into a retail store to purchase something, and they give you a receipt, look at that receipt after you use the credit card purchased. If that receipt has all of the digits of your credit card number, report that to that business, and then also report it to your credit card company. They cannot print that. They're only allowed to print the last 4 digits of that credit card number. Next slide, Terry. Yeah, we had to create a whole. We wanted to create a whole, and we didn't have to. I mean, we wanted to create a whole entire slide about ransomware because it's gotten so big, and the reason it's gotten so big is really because it's big business. I mean, I think the last statistic was Mantech that ransomware is close to about a $5 million a year business now, and it doesn't sound like a lot of money compared to other stuff, but it's just the level of the danger of it, and how easy it is for cyber criminals to, you know, really develop a business without any risk, and you kind of don't know who they really are. I mean, it's really the first bullet point really defines what ransomware is. It marries old extortion methods with new technologies, and I mean, we kind of joke about it, but it's really true. It's almost like a digital mugging. I mean, if you look at how a victim is mugged, that the mugger is actually staring at the victim. We're gathering surveillance about the victim for a while, you know, really before it actually happens. And it's the same thing with a lot of these cyber criminals. I mean, they're trying things. They're sending you or your staff or your employees fake emails, and they want you to click on things, and they just keep on poking holes at it. And at some point, they're going to get in. and we don't want them to be, but we're seeing that a lot, that they're getting in through email and text messages and things like that. And that's where you need to create the awareness. It truly is a business without risk from individuals without a face. I always talk about the 1993 cartoon from I think the New York Times or the New Yorker, and it's a cartoon of two dogs, and one dog is in front of a computer, and underneath on the caption it says, "No one knows you're a dog on the internet." It's really true. We don't know who's doing this stuff. We have a general idea, coming from Russia, China, India, Philippines, some of those countries, but we generally don't know. And that's I think what really makes it even scarier. We know that based on the data that we've gathered with a lot of our clients, we're definitely being targeted from a lot of those networks. And the reason being is because they know that we have poor processes. They know that there are holes within the healthcare industry that can allow them to gain access and encrypt a lot of our files. The other really bad thing is that there are ransomware development kits readily available on the internet, and they kind of work hand in hand with what they call ransomware hosting and merchant services. There are a number of them out there. Tox is one. I think another one's called Nuclear. We've looked into it, and it's within 15 to 20 minutes, anyone can develop a ransomware kit, send in and the way they do it, they actually, as you're going through this development kit, they actually they give you an example of how to do it. And the one example is going to someone's website, and for example, my email is on a website, kchang@cogergroup.com. It's published, and they look at another email and kind of look at the naming conventions of the emails. Once they figured out the naming conventions, they basically try to fake sending a email attachment to Terry Wilk. I mean, we've seen a lot of this before with our coworkers. Why in the world is Terry Wilk sending me an email attachment to look at race cars? I mean, we don't talk about race cars, so why in the world would Terry Wilk do that? And the reason being is because they want you to open that attachment, and the attachment can do a number of things. It could be some sort of just a Word document message, it could be anything that would launch a web link to a website to download a virus or Trojan or anything like that to basically get in. Again, the goal is to get in. Once they're in, it's only a matter of time before your organization is hit with anything. I mean, a virus, and like Hollywood Presbyterian, they were hit with a ransomware that encrypted all their files, and that's a problem, especially with some of the newer ones like the Tesla crypt. The Tesla crypt that happened today, or that was reported today, all the major security firms are saying there is no way out of it. You better make sure you have good backups. And that changes all kinds of things. That changes the way we look at our data from a backup perspective. No longer is it good enough to back up once a day or once a night or once a week. You got to do it. I mean, we at Coker, we're always changing our backup strategies for our clients. I mean, we're looking at probably backing up once an hour, once every 15 minutes. I mean, you just don't have a choice when it comes to something like this. Terry, next slide, please. So, there are a number of strategies out there, and I think Terry made a really good point. It's not just an IT thing anymore; it's a business thing. It's an overall security strategy. I mean, you really need to look at security from an ecosystem perspective. I mean, it's about education. It's about backing up data. With this new one, again, we're all going to have to change our backup strategies. And we've got the typical antivirus, anti-malware tools out there. Server monitoring, always really important. The new big thing, and the NSA has been really pushing this for a while now, actually for the last 5 years, that implementing internet website whitelisting, application whitelisting, and we've heard about the internet whitelisting for a while. It's just, you know, allowing basically everything is blacklisted with the exception of a few websites that your employees and your staff would use on a day-to-day basis. Same thing with application whitelisting, listing only Word documents, your EMR, you know, and you know, maybe your accounting software, things like that, and blocking everything else. I mean, it's gotten to the point where we have to take a lot of these drastic measures. And I'm going to give you another drastic measure. We've got a lot of clients that are implementing this, and we've got a lot of clients that are actually considering it. Because of the way these ransomware, the mechanism and the strategy that these ransomwares use to get into a network, which is over email, we are starting to basically filter a lot of support staff where they're only allowed to receive emails from certain email domains. I mean, within the organization, definitely, and maybe with some partner hospitals or partner vendors. Everything else, they're not able to receive it. I mean, it's gotten to that level where it's dangerous enough. It's all over the news that you know, a lot of these organizations are coming to us and asking, you know, what do we have to do? And you know, nothing's off the table. I mean, 9 times out of 10, the things that I present to my clients, they don't blink an eye. They want to get it done.
Okay, well, thank you, Kyle.
Yep.
Okay.
No problem at all.
Then the real question comes down to, is it safe? And those of you that may be my age or close to it, I don't know if you remember the movie The Marathon Man. The key phrase that kept getting repeated to Dustin Hoffman was, is it safe? And of course, in the movie, he wasn't quite sure what that meant. But in our case, you know, the question is it safe? And we say, oh, yeah, we got a good, safe environment. Is it safe? In other words, keep asking the question, drilling down, are you really sure? Is it safe as it can be? And what do you need to do? Because you're not just protecting technology, we're talking about protecting the very core of the business. And thankfully, this hasn't happened yet, but my concern is that there's going to be a ransomware or some kind of event that happens that causes a company to go out of business. And I hope that doesn't happen, but we will certainly see. The American Hospital Association, and you have a few more slides. We're keeping an eye on the clock because we want to make sure that we leave some time at the end for some questions. But the American Hospital Association has come up with 6 actions to manage cybersecurity risks. And you're going to find that a lot of this is higher level, that are ideas, they're what you should do. Sometimes it doesn't give you the exact how, but it's a start. First, establish a core cybersecurity team and really involving the board. And some of the leading organizations that, as in our research that we see, and a few of our clients are now making this cybersecurity a board issue and educating the board at this point to get their attention. And the reason is, sooner or later, they're going to need some money to be able to spend to improve the security infrastructure or training or whatever it is in their environment. And they don't want, what they want to do is set the stage early, and I think that's a wise strategy. Developing a response plan like the NIST or the National Institute of Standards and Technology, and I've got some sample slides that I'll share with you there to give you a feel what that is. That's a great comprehensive framework that you could adopt and adapt to as well to develop your cybersecurity risk management and how you would respond to it. Thirdly, I mentioned earlier about all medical devices to make sure that they have the prevention measures and that they're not currently infected. So when your hospital, for example, buys, or your physician office buys a new piece of medical equipment, that has some computerization in it, you want to make sure, and this is where you work with the vendor, that when they install it, it doesn't already come kind of pre-infected, if you will. We've got to go to that level. Then of course, reviewing and testing, evaluating, and updating your incident response and data breach plans, trying to stay ahead of the game. If you do have a breach, not only addressing the breach and fixing it, and hopefully it's nothing major, but then going back and saying, okay, what can we learn from that to continue improving the way we do things. There's a number of emerging information sharing organizations. I probably should have put some references on here, but if you Google security sharing or IT security sharing, you'll find a number of these organizations, and they're designed to share lessons learned with each other. And on the insurance coverage, is it enough? You know, just like is it safe, that question, is your insurance really enough? Based on, you know, the threats that we are seeing. So let me give you a few slides, and then we're just about done with the formal presentation part of it on the NIST. And I took these slides right off of the website. I did indicate it at the bottom there, nist.gov/cyberframework, but they have spent a lot of time, research, and good, excellent recommendations, a good solid foundation, dealing around risk management at the executive level, the business process level in the middle there, and the implementations operations level. Now obviously this is a conceptual diagram that tries to depict their particular cyber framework. And if you look to on the right-hand side and the left-hand side, we see the interaction from the executive level, which looks at the organizational risk and decisions and priorities, through the business level of looking at the critical infrastructure risk management and the budget, the profile, what it is that you're doing in terms of action, and then it feeds the actual implementation operations level of securing the infrastructure and implementing the security profile as NIST defines it, and I'll give you a little sense of what that is. Here's the essence of what the core is, what they call the Cybersecurity Framework core. It has 5 key functions: identify, protect, detect, respond, recover. There's a section for categories, subcategories, and information references. And we're going to take I didn't explode that out, but here's a next layer down for all 5 of these functions. It shows the identity, protection, and so on. And it has a category unique identifier that is within the NIST. So for example, under ID or identity, the very first row, ID.AM, the category there is asset management, meaning, okay, if we're going to first of all help identify you know, what our security risks are, we first of all have to know what our asset is, what kind of management of our assets do we need to put in place, what are our assets and what kind of management. Same thing for business environment, understanding our business environment from the NIST perspective, governance, risk assessment, all the way down. You can kind of scan this. And again, all of this is available online, free of charge. If you don't have a security infrastructure, this is a great start to put a security plan together. And that's why I'm sharing it today. And then here's a specific example under identify, again, from the website. The asset management is defined as the data, personnel, devices, systems, and facilities that enable the organization to achieve its business purposes and so on, as it says there. I don't need to read the whole thing to you. And then it breaks out subcategories. So it says, okay, of that asset management definition, there's physical devices, there's software platforms, there's organizational communications and data flows that are mapped, external IS systems, there's resources that are prioritized based on business mission critical things, cybersecurity roles. So it begins to lay out from a high level those 5 functions into categories and then subcategories. And it also gives references that you can go to. So it isn't just something that's made up out of the blue, but the NIST did refer to some other information security organization, ISA, COBIT, and give references to particular documents or sections, paragraphs within those documents to try to define what these things mean. This is really important because, as one example, if you or your organization was going to approach your insurance company to say, look, we'd like to buy some cybersecurity risk insurance, they're not just going to blindly write you a check, or I'm sorry, write you a policy and then write you a check if you are hacked. They're going to say, wait a minute, much like on your medical side, well, before you get health insurance, typically, or life insurance, depending on the amount and how old you are, they'll want to do an assessment to see what kind of level of risk you have. If you're able to demonstrate, look, here's our security plan, here's our layout for this, and using NIST as an example, and here's some policies, procedures to see what you have in place, that there's some realism here, then you're much more likely to get the types and levels of insurance that you want, as one example. As well as if your board comes to you, and I've been a CIO for many years in the past, if a board comes to me, or executive, my executive team peers would say, why do you want all this money? Why do you want $500,000 for security? I can use this as ways to help educate them and understand what our plan is, and that, you know what, this isn't a technology issue, it comes back to the business issue standpoint. Some final thoughts. I'll quickly hit these. I'll ask Kyle to make some comments, and then we'll open up for questions. But the bottom line on all this is all of us are extremely vulnerable in our personal and professional lives, and I believe, and Kyle believes too, sooner or later, in one way or another, you as an individual, your organization will be hacked. And as Kyle said, and we've seen evidence of this, every day there's hundreds or if not thousands of attempts of hackers trying to get in through different ways. And fortunately, our technology that we have today is catching a lot of it, but there's always new things coming. Prepare now, man. Don't wait. Do your comprehensive assessment to come up with what you need to do to prevent things, to detect things, to fix things, to improve things, and to strengthen things. And then you develop your cybercrime strategy, which can include, well, what is this strategy all about? Well, it's a business problem. We're trying to protect the business through the technology doorways, if you will, that's there. Why is it important? It's protecting our assets. And if we really look at our finances, our money, and now our data as a real asset, that's what we're really talking about, protecting our money, our data, our assets. The governance, how are you going to do this in your organization, given the culture, given the perspectives, given the experience, the policies, procedures, education, training, and looking at this role of a Chief Information Security Officer, CISO, that has been in several other industries, but it's really emerging pretty quick in the IT industry. And there's a push right now. The CISOs, for the most part of what I see in the industry, is the CISO falls under the CIO, Chief Information Officer. But because of the ransomware and some of the direct risks that cybercrime has to the business, I'm seeing some push, some organizations talking about and having the CISO report directly to the CEO to work in conjunction with the compliance officer as well as the CIO, but it's becoming to get that important of a function. And there are some board committees, part of their audit committee or corporate compliance committee, that are having an accountability aspect built into that for the management team, the executive team, to make sure back to the board they're reporting what they're doing to fight this cybercrime. And just a parting tip, and Kyle, I'll turn it over to you after this, but when you're working in your day-to-day and you're speeding through your emails and clicks and all that, look for URLs with spelling errors or wrong domain names. That sometimes is a good hint that you may want to think twice about clicking on it or going there. Wrong domain name might be, instead of something you're expecting, .org, and it's a .net or .com. Now, realistically, most users aren't going to be paying that much attention, but that's some of the ways that these viruses and malware gets introduced. Kyle, any final comments you want to make before we go to our questions?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, on the final thoughts slide, I mean, two things really jump out at me. The one bullet point is prepare now, and the other bullet point is policies, procedures, education, and training. Those two things are not static. They need to evolve. They need to adapt. And the reason they do is because the cybercriminals are evolving and adapting every single day. So that's my final thought for today.
Well, thank you, Kyle. Savannah, I'll turn it back over to you. We can open up for some questions.
Thank you, Terry and Kyle. If you have any questions, I see some of you have already started entering questions in. If you want to use the GoToMeeting dashboard to submit your questions, and then Terry and Kyle will read those questions and answer them.
Here's a question that's come in, and that is, and I kind of addressed some of this already, but I can speak to it again. How do I go about educating or raising awareness within my organization that this is a real problem? And I guess as I think about that and going back to some of the things I made, one of the best ways is to compile some case studies, much like we kind of did here, Kyle and I, putting together a couple of examples. And believe me, there's a ton to choose from, unfortunately. And if you're starting from ground zero, where there's no awareness, there's no interest at all, of course, that's a whole lot harder. But somehow, some way, you need to get the attention of somebody in the organization. I know that's easy for me to say because I'm not in your organization, but, and I take it by this question that there might be some difficulty there of getting attention. But, you know, as these things happen literally every day, start compiling, preparing a, you know, a one-page summary or a presentation, or if you have a steering committee or an audience that you get with some of the organizational leaders, that's the way to do it, in my opinion. That's the way I did it when I was a CIO. And of course, you know, I've been out of the CIO realm probably a couple of years, almost 3 years now, when I got back into consulting. But if there was ever an issue that I wanted to really raise in front of the executive team, I would work through my steering committee. I would talk to my administrative team when we would meet weekly. I would bring it, put it on the agenda. And even at our board level, you know, a lot of the board members are business people, and they face these same kinds of issues. So sometimes they're ahead of the game and saying, hey, we did this, this, and this in our business. Are you guys doing this? And so suddenly you're on the defensive, or can find yourself on the defensive, say, well, no, you know, that's something we need to look into, or yeah, we are. But, you know, in other words, it's grabbing the bull by the horns and taking charge of it. So my advice would be, compile your data, your case studies, and then also that's where the assessment comes in, because somebody's going to say, okay, where are we at? What do we have? What are our holes? It's nice to have that up front as opposed to being asked and you say, well, I don't know, we really need to go figure that out. It's nice to be able to figure that out first and then tell them, here's the current state of what we're facing, and here's a plan I would recommend going forward. Frankly, there's lots of firms and expertise out in the industry that can do it. Clearly, you know, Coker, that's one of our areas of expertise too. But the key takeaway is do something now. You know, get some action, the preparation from the bullet there. Good question. Kyle, while we're waiting for any more questions to come in, what is your opinion on, because I remember a couple of clients talking to me about this, certifications. If somebody wanted to get certified to build up their own expertise and awareness and credibility or whatever it is on security, what might be a couple of certifications you might recommend?
There are actually a number of certifications out there. I mean, for CISO, security officer type level, there's the high-tech certifications. There's the standard CISSP type certifications. And those are more for just senior level management type certifications to develop a security program within an organization. There's another one that's really gaining in popularity, and it's employee security awareness training and certification. There are a number of organizations that give that out. I highly recommend it to a lot of my clients. A number of them are going through that.
And of course, they could Google and find the different websites that would describe this more, and any costs involved in the curriculum and how long it would take and so on. And I believe a lot of these are online now, aren't they, Kyle?
Correct, yes.
Yeah.
I saw a question come in. Question is, do you recommend eliminating all access points into your institution's computers, USB ports, thumb drives, CD drives, USB ports for external drives? Yeah, there's going to be, with security, there's a balance between security and usability. What may need to happen is we're starting to get into the groove of eliminating that type of access to the very easily accessible workstations out on the floor in the exam rooms and in medical records, things like that. But there may be a designated room, an office manager's office or something like that, or just kind of like a secure data room where they're able to view USB ports or able to view USB keys using the USB ports or CD drives. But the one thing that's really important here, and we've actually heard this from a client who recommended us to a different client, just awareness. The other client basically had an employee found a USB key in front of their office, and they picked it up, plugged it into one of their workstations, and thought it was one of their employees' USB keys, and that was it. The entire network was compromised with the virus. They weren't encrypted, but it was just compromised with the virus. And yeah, again, it really goes back to education and training.
Thank you, Kyle. Another question popped in. What dollar amount of cyber insurance coverage do you see hospitals getting? Good question. There's two ways that I see this happening. One is hospitals and insurance companies are simply in some cases, they're updating their amount of liability coverage. It could be as much as $5–10 million. So that, in other words, cybersecurity is just another covered liability or business protection insurance, or in a business protection insurance policy, I should say. In other cases, they are getting separate policies specific for cybercrime insurance. And I mean, depending on the size of the hospital and what kind of budget they have, I'm seeing a minimum of $1 million, and I've seen as high as $10 million, just for cybercrime insurance. But I would, if we were to poll all of the hospitals out there, for example, I would bet a lot of them don't have it, or they really haven't addressed it, or it's not clear in their policies. So, this particular item, in my opinion, would be a dialogue to have with your corporate compliance officer, and work in partnership with them, taking that forward. But that'll give you a sense of what I'm seeing in the industry. And by the way, one other thought that I want to mention: if there's anybody on the participating today that is a vendor, that you have a product that you're trying to sell, it is extremely important, in my opinion, as a consultant, and then looking back, if I was wearing my CIO hat, that right up front, not necessarily the first thing that when you present or talk to somebody about your product, but it's at the top 3 or 4 items that you want to emphasize before you close the meeting about how you are addressing security with your product, whatever it may be. That is really, really going to be critical. So, I'll stop there in the interest of time, but that's something you need to be really addressing proactively. And you have our contact information if anyone would like to talk further. No charge, of course, but just to talk further. Kyle or I would love to, do that with you, and we'll learn from each other, because this is all coming at all of us. Even Coca Group. Matter of fact, just the other day, Kyle and I talked to our CEO and our executive team, and we're going to take some time at our next monthly meeting, the end of this month, to talk in more detail about what Coker's doing, and when's the last time we did an assessment, and what do we have in place. We're highly confident, but we're not just going to sit on our laurels. So we're in this case, we're taking our own medicine because we have to. Savannah, I think that's it, unless there's any more questions that we can answer that's come in.
I think we are at the end of our time, so if you have any further questions, you can reach out to Terry or Kyle directly on the contact information provided there. And we thank you for joining us for today's presentation. Again, the slides to this presentation will be emailed to you shortly after we conclude this presentation. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.